Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the Scrimshaw Show. My name's EScrimshaw. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. This week we're going to be talking about Ontario, because that campaign has officially started. I'm not going to get into Roe. I have nothing interesting to say, and I have nothing. It's fucking important, and that if that decision ends up being, the wording of the court, it's a fucking disgrace, but there's nothing I can do about it, and I don't have the energy to pontificate on what it all means, especially given that anyone who claims to have strong opinions about what it means for political outcomes is almost assuredly lying to you. Follow me on Twitter at EScrimshaw. Follow the show on Twitter at Scrimshaw_show. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Like this video. It does things for the algorithm, and I am, trying to grow a platform on here. So, that would be decently helpful. On today's episode of the pod, it's Ontario, guys. It's all Ontario. It's always Ontario. It's forever Ontario. At least until we get some, useful, decent U.S. polling. That said, until then, let's get into it. I'm recording this at just after 3 Eastern on May 4th. May the 4th be with you if anyone gives a fuck about Star Wars. So I'm recording this now. We have Ipsos's poll today. We don't have IRG yet, and we don't have the beginning of the Main Street track yet. I only say that to say this is a moment in time where anything I say about the polls are probably going to be wrong by tomorrow. It's probably going to change between now and then because Main Street's going to come out and they're probably going to be different than where they were last week. I'm not going to guess whether they're more pro-Tory or less pro-Tory. No fucking idea. Ipsos is on the polar coaster, as anyone who saw their release today, going from a 10-point PC lead to a 3-point PC lead to a 13-point PC lead, all in the span of 6 weeks, seems definitely true. And then we just get the fun one of what's Abacus going to do, what's Innovative going to do when they release, which it'll probably be out by the time you're listening to this, but I'm not waiting. And you get into this thing where there are two, before Ipsos today, there were two pretty clear universes of the polls. There was the Ipsos Abacus online pollsters, which had the lead in the 3-4 range, which had the PC vote down sort of 36-35, Liberals at 32. And then you had Main Street and Nanos, which both had the Liberals around 30 and the PCs around 37-38. And that distinction is meaningful because 37-38, 7-ish point lead is right on the line of majority government for Doug Ford again. And a 3-4 point lead is minority parliament, game over, Red River. And so these distinctions matter quite a bit. And now Ipsos has just gone and screwed it up. IRG is probably going to have a liberal lead or some shit, knowing them. But what you're going to end up seeing with all of this is there's going to be a lot. Brian Graves, I assume, will put something out soon. I won't see it because, he blocked me on Twitter. But we're going to get a lot of polling soon. And we're going to get a lot of contradictory polling. And yes, the next time I write a column about Ontario, the headline will probably be Ipsos is wrong. Unless Main Street or IRG validate them, but, my instinct right now is that Ipsos is wrong and they're just extremely volatile in Ontario these days, and I don't really give a shit. But the thing about all of this is, at the end of the day, Doug Ford won't win when the chips are down is not an argument that Doug Ford will be losing every day of the campaign. There will presumably be days when Doug Ford is in majority territory and days when Doug Ford is not in majority territory. In my seat projections, in the Main Street seat projections, in whoever's, right? Presumably. presumably there will be days when Doug Ford has good days, when the tracking polls lean a little more conservative, when you get, more of the, when you get a lull of pro-liberal pollsters not releasing, and you get, a conservative leaning pollster releasing, and you have to reweight your data for most recent releases. Like, you'll get situations where it'll be touch and go. This isn't the federal election where the Tories don't have a path. Even if I don't think the Tories will win by the end of the campaign, it's not at all like federal Canada, where I was staunchly of the belief that there was no path. There's absolutely a path. There's a path to Doug Ford winning fairly comfortably. I just don't think that's the most likely path, for a bevy of reasons I've outlined before. But this isn't Canada. Like, this absolutely isn't. If something like what PJ Fournier currently has, which is Doug Ford, I think, losing a few seats, but the majority not being at risk, that's not crazy. I think it's wrong, but it's not crazy. And what you end up looking at, and the thing that I think I'm going to focus on for a long time, is there's no good answers. Like, there's not always a good answer in an election. There's not always a good answer in a crisis. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about Roe, but, like, there might just not be anything Democrats can do about this. They can organize, they can do this, they can get mad. There might not be anything you can do because they lost an election. They lost an election at a bad time. And I sort of come back to the same thing. This is just like, there might not be a good option in this election. You might be of the view that Stephen Del Duca is a bad option. He is substantially better than Doug Ford. He is a reasonably thoughtful political leader right now. He is at least trying shit. And for whatever you think of, like, the Bucka ride, yeah, okay, fine. It's probably just a middle-class ripoff, right? Yeah, fine. It's probably just a way of bribing middle-class commuters, civil servants who are forced to go into the office 3 days a week, which, as of right now, I think is the current Ontario Union plan for stability, or current Ontario Public Service plan for stability. Whether the union can get that date pushed back again, we'll see. But do you think Toronto and do you think people in Brampton and Mississauga are going to be unduly hurt by the fact that, GO and local transit services are going to be cheaper? Like, yes, is it a middle class ripoff? Probably. Sometimes you need middle class ripoffs to win elections, and I'm not going to get outraged about someone trying to do something to win an election. Also, he's canceling the 413, so there's going to be fucking plenty of money to pay for it. But the thing I sort of come back to is there are not always good options, right? There are not always great options. You can't always get what you want. You just can't. You can't always get what you want, and you can't always get good outcomes. But minimizing bad outcomes is good in and of itself. And this is the thing that I keep coming back to, is that the NDP are DOA. Outside of, like, maybe 15 seats, the NDP are DOA. Dead on arrival. If you are, there are maybe 15 seats in the province where if you're a tactical voter, your tactical vote should be the NDP. Maybe 15. Because the thing is, most of the NDP seats, you can vote Liberal in London. You're not going to cost the NDP seats. The Conservatives aren't going to come up the middle in London or in Hamilton Centre or in most of downtown Toronto, right? If you're if you're in Beaches, if you're in, Toronto St. Paul's is going to flip anyways. If you're in Danforth, if you're in Davenport, if you're in Parkdale, if you're in Uni Rose, if you're in Torsen, like, you're just not at a risk. Ottawa Centre, like, you're just not risking a Doug Ford government by electing a Liberal and not a New Democrat. There's no risk that the Conservatives are going to come up the middle and win fucking Toronto Centre or University Rosedale. It's not going to happen. The NDP The NDP's argument today on the first day of the campaign is we're the official opposition, ergo vote for us. It's not an argument. That's you taking for granted your position. It's not an argument. It's arrogance. It's pure, uncut fucking arrogance to think that, well, we're the rightful owners of the opposition died to the left. Well, we should be the ones to be the next government. No, you have to fucking earn it, and you haven't. You've been a useless opposition for the last 4 years, and you're done. The Liberal success is not a story of Liberal success. It's a story of New Democratic failure, and it's pathetic. As someone who cast my first Ontario election ballot for the New Democratic Party, it's truly, truly pathetic. And it's one of those things where I keep coming back to the notion that I keep coming back to what this election really is. I keep coming back to what this election truly is. It's a choice between an imperfect opposition and a frankly horrible government. And it's one of those things where we can have as many conversations as we want about, is Doug Ford that bad? Is Doug Ford really whatever? I mean, you're getting to a situation where the Ontario Liberals are good. You know, they're talking about building 200 new schools, repairing, upgrading, and rebuilding more than 4,500, all paid for by canceling, Highway 413. That's good. Is it perfect? Is it enough? Is it this? Is it that? I don't care. Canceling a useless highway and using that money to build better schools is like some pretty good shit. That's a pretty good choice. That's a pretty good sales pitch, right? So we're here. We're at an election. Do I know for 1,000% sure if it's going to happen? No. Is it unsettling that I'm not able to be nearly as confident about this election as I was on Canada? Yeah, fine. At the end of the day, Doug Ford has never shown himself to be a good retail politician in an election context. He was fine when he was, he's fine when he doesn't have a lot of stuff to work with. He's fine when he gets to stand with Christine Elliott. He's fine when the trappings of government and officialdom are behind him, and he's not very good when he has to freelance. And the thing about people who only survive in structured contexts is that structured contexts never survive. They don't. They don't for a simple reason. That's not how the universe works. Election campaigns take on a life of their own, right? We're seeing it in Australia right now, right? Which is, the campaign looked like it was coming off the rails for Anthony Albanese because he screwed up a bunch of basic economic management questions of not knowing what the interest rate is and not knowing what the unemployment rate was. And then Albanese gets COVID. He has to stay in isolation for a week, and basically during his isolation period, Scott Morrison lost his damn mind. And the thing is that you get to these increasingly pathetic situations with Morrison day after day, week after week. It looks just purely pathetic. And I'm not saying that that's going to be Doug Ford. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that where we thought the campaign would be from 3 days before the campaign, yeah, this seems pretty reasonable. Both the polling outcomes, but also the sort of feel of the campaign. But if you would have asked people after day 3 of the campaign, I think people would be pretty surprised that Labor stabilized the lead and they haven't really lost any ground. And so we just get to this place where again and again and again and again, it's It's one of those things where I don't know the answer, and I don't like not knowing the answer. It's one of the stupidest things that we have to go through. But the thing is, it's really... This campaign is going to be hard. But the thing about this campaign is it's going to be hard in a very, like, specific, sort of like old school hard campaign way. It's going to be a campaign where Doug Ford is going to try and have as little stuff happen as possible. He's going to want a very front-runner-y Stephen Harper 2011. I answer 4 questions every press avail. I don't answer anything difficult. I wait out the debates, and I pray to God that no one watches the debates. Because remember, Ford's first 2 weeks of the last campaign, 3 weeks actually, were pretty bad. Like, he walked into the route with like 42% of the vote. He fell down to 35. He beat the ever-loving shit out of Andrew Horvath in the one leaders debate that I was covered on, I think, like all the networks. And then he spent the last 10 days showing up to every event with Christine Elliott, Carolyn Mulroney, Vic Fideli, and someone else. Yes, that's like every conservative MPP I can name. No, I can name Lecce, but I don't know if he was there. Might have been. I don't know. Point being, Ford's not a good campaigner. Ford had to execute a very late campaign pivot away from, Fordian politics, almost as it were, to the politics of, don't worry, it's fine, moderates won't hate me because I'm going to stand beside, 2 strong women at every campaign event for the last 10 days. Literally, Doug Ford's first campaign event after that 2018 debate, and his entire message in the 2018 debate was the NDP can't be trusted. Not Andrew Horvath can't be trusted, but the NDP ran an unserious slate of candidates in safe conservative seats. Right? That's how this works. That's how this game goes. In seats the NDP had no prospect of winning, they ran like weird socialist weirdos. In a lot of them. And there was a guy, I think, who was like anti-poppy, and so Ford tried to spin him as being, like a, racist, anti-veteran, asshole. There was, there were some unserious people. And Ford's argument became, do you trust the NDP and their team? Not Andrew Horvath, the NDP. And the answer to that question was kind of no. Because who the fuck were any of these dippers? I didn't know then, and still don't know now, who would be the NDP health minister? Who would be the NDP education minister? Who would be the NDP finance minister? I don't know the answer to any of those questions. And, yes, I'm aware that I could Google who the NDP, education critic is. That's not my point. My point is very clearly that the NDP have failed. And they failed last time. They blew an election that they genuinely could have won. Because they didn't have an answer for the world's easiest to see attack line of all time. And Ford telegraphed it in the debate, and then he made the same argument for 10 days, and he won the campaign. Now, what Andrew Horvath has to do now is get the fuck out of the way. What Stephen Del Duca needs to do is have a better answer for those attacks. But the other thing Del Duca needs to do is he needs to remember that Ford was closer to losing that campaign than it looked. At the end, yeah, it wasn't that close. It was like a 7-ish point lead, 7-ish point win for Ford. But it wasn't always that close, and it wasn't always that easy. And if Del Duca can get Ford going in the same way that Horvath managed to, at least at the beginning of the campaign, there's a serious road to not even, to not just like a slim liberal minority backed up with the NDP and maybe even the Greens, but there's a chance the Liberals might just get to 55 seats on their own. If they can run a good campaign, it's possible. I don't know that the Liberals have the juice to go third to majority again like they did federally. But the notion that the Conservatives are just going to that the only question of this campaign is, does Ford get 55 to 75 seats? I don't think that's right. Like, I don't think the Conservatives have a floor that high. They have a floor that high if they're going to poll 36%, but I don't know if they're going to poll 36%. It's kind of my thing. And the thing I just keep coming back to about this is Ontario has fundamentally not wanted to elect Conservative governments in my lifetime. They've elected 2 Conservative governments in my lifetime. They've elected 3 Conservative governments since the end of the Big Blue Machine. Ford and Mike Harris twice. The first time Mike Harris won was because the Liberals were nowhere to be found, and Bob Rae was as useless as tits on a bowl. The second time, Dalton McGuinty didn't know what he was doing and ran a bad campaign. And the third time, Kathleen Wynne didn't resign. And yes, Kathleen needed to have resigned. And if not, then someone, Bob Shirelli, Yasser Nakvi, someone should have stood up and said so. I was around the Liberals after they won Scarborough. Or after they lost the Scarborough River by-election. I was around them. I was there that night, actually. And there was a real conversation of should Kathleen resign? And everyone was waiting for someone else to make the first move, and then it was too late. And we got to the campaign, and what was obvious to everyone with a brain happened, and they fell to third place. But that said, the appetite for Liberal government in this province is pretty strong most of the time. Kathleen Wynne managed to win a 4th term that by any fundamentals model she shouldn't have. History suggests that the Liberals should not have won 3 terms. The left should not have won a 4th term. McGuinty probably shouldn't have won his second. It should have won the 2011 minority. But even once that happened, the notion that Kathleen Wynne should have won in 2014 is just absurd. The history of those kinds of governments, deeply unpopular, having to change their leaders. Usually those governments get tossed. Right? Kim Campbell, federally, Paul Martin ended up winning a minority, but even that minority was pretty tenuous. The idea of going back into majority government after being in minority is just, it's quite the situation to put yourself in. And the thing yes, by all sort of historic metrics, whatever, Doug Ford probably should be reelected, right? Most of the time, outside of Bob Rae, Ontario governments get reelected. Peterson got reelected in 1987. McGuinty got reelected, multiple times. Obviously, the Big Blue Machine got reelected for 40 some odd years. Federally, the last time, when was the last time a federal government didn't get reelected? Bennett? In 35? For 1 term? You could say Mackenzie King. Well, I mean, that was before, but the number of 1-term governments in this country is the list isn't very long. Provincially, the PQ in 2014 were one and out. New Brunswick's traded one and done governments in 2010 and then 2014, but the New Brunswick PCs did get reelected. 1-term governments in this country are pretty rare. They're not precedented, but they're pretty rare. Obviously, Rachel Notley in Alberta, although whether or not she would have won in the first place, if not for the split rights, a fight that I don't really want to have with people. Jason Kenney could be that, although I'll have to talk about it. I'll have to talk about Alberta probably next week, because I think the leadership review comes in next week. But 1-term governments are pretty rare in this country. It's a pretty gutsy thing to say that a 1-term government, to predict that a government will go 1 term and 1 term only, doesn't necessarily mean anything. right? I made part of my big profile in predicting a bunch of red wall, historically labor seats to go conservative. So, historically X happens is not an argument I tend to like, because it's mostly the refuge of people who don't actually understand what's happening. I think Ford's going to lose. I think Del Duca will be premier. That is not me saying it is inevitable, and that is not me saying it is impossible Doug Ford wins. It's very possible that Doug Ford will win this campaign. I don't think that's more likely than the Liberals becoming government at the end of it. We'll see. We'll see how the campaign goes. I'm making a prediction based on what I think will happen. It's entirely possible, if not probable, that by the end of this campaign, we will be in a different spot than I expect. That could mean that the PCs are stronger than I currently expect them to be by the end. And it could also mean that I am bearish on the Liberal chances. Maybe the NDP... No, I was going to say maybe the NDP surges, and I can't even say that with a straight face, because fuck Andrew Horvath and fuck the NDP. But this is where my head is. The thing about Ontario is that it's really, it's genuinely the hardest going into the election, right? It's the hardest election campaign I've ever had to cover. I've done 2 federal campaigns. I did a U.S. primary, I did a U.S. general, I did a U.K. general election. I project Australia. This is the hardest one I've ever had to do. This is the one where I feel the least confident going in of what I believe. I think Doug Ford's going to lose. I think Stephen Del Duca will be the next premier of Ontario. And I fundamentally believe that because I do not think the voters of this province and the voters who claim to want a more progressive, more open, more inclusive society are truly going to vote in such a way as to enable the re-election of a premier whose incompetence is only rivaled by his division, whose ineptitude is only matched by his vindictiveness, and whose contempt for the second rate is only matched by his own status as a member of the second rate. Doug Ford has been a fraudulent, horrible premier of Ontario. And may it be his legacy that he joined Bob Rae as only the second one-term premier in this country since 1942. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the show. Follow me on Twitter at EScrimshaw. Follow the Scrimshaw Show on Twitter at Scrimshaw_show. Like this video. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Buy Salvation in the Storm. Should have put that one up top. And have a great week, everybody.